name is Mrs. Denise Parker. I'm with the National College Resources Foundation. I'm super excited to introduce our special guests talking about careers if you speak multiple languages, pretty much. It's Miss Lynn Roach, and she is representing her organization. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Lynn.
Well, greetings, everyone. Bonsoir, boa tarde, buenas tardes, good evening, good afternoon. I'm on the East Coast, so it's about 7:20 for me over here. Thank you so much, Ms. Parker, for introducing me and inviting me to be here to participate in this career incubator, to have the opportunity to share my industry knowledge and expertise and experience. I am open and welcoming all of you to ask as many questions as you have. And I also invite you to connect with me at the end on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram, wherever you'd like to be. So I'm very excited to be here, and I'm glad that you're able to join us. And I understand we're live streaming, so hello to all of you wherever you may be across the nation. Welcome. I also want to take the opportunity, of course, to thank Dr. Teresa Price, who is the founder of the organization and who is steadfast in the movement to bring students and career professionals together in this career incubator. Thank you, Dr. Price, for always inviting me. So I kicked off, before we went on the live stream, I asked a question to a couple of our participants in the audience in terms of who is multilingual and what languages do you speak? So one language would be English and something else. So I'm ready if you would take a moment in the chat to drop what language you speak. And when I say speak, I don't mean a little bit, not a couple of words, but fluently with proficiency. You speak it as well as I'm speaking English, your language, okay? So share with us whatever your language is, Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Wolof, Igbo, whatever it is. We'd be happy to know. Welcome. I just want to get an idea of the international population and the many languages that we have that are present.
Okay, we have in the chat, we have somebody speaking Arabic, French, and English. And then we also have Spanish. And then obviously those are the three common languages that are happening here.
That are present. Awesome.
Besides the languages that come from abroad in every country, could you also say that knowing digital languages, sign languages, all those types of different ways of communication?
Yes, thank you for posing that question, Ms. Parker. I was going to get into that American Sign Language in particular is absolutely considered part of the language career. And within the American Sign Language, I am newly discovering there is a Black American Sign Language as well. And so I'm learning more about that. And that came abroad as a result of segregation in schools in the South during Jim Crow. And so we were not, African Americans, people of color were generally not privy to having afforded the opportunity to have an American Sign Language person available to them. So within the Black community, they developed their own vernacular and standards as well. So this is also recognized. So that's exciting. So we have American Sign Language. We have, in terms of language career, we have foreign languages, all the different languages that are, spoken around the world. As you know, United States is a melting pot. We have folks from everywhere represented. And some of the more popular languages that are really in demand right now, as far as if you wanted to study something, I would absolutely encourage you with French, Spanish, Portuguese is on the rise, okay? Arabic, Mandarin Chinese, okay? And there are quite a few more that are quite popular, but those are the staple in terms of demand. Of course, right now with the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, certainly those language pairs are in demand as well. Russian and Ukrainian language interpreters and translators are very much in demand today.
Okay, so let's just start it off with just some general insight. You're in college or you're pursuing your career. How do you make your language more prominent feature in what your resume? What are some of the important ways you can make your language more prominent, especially if you're walking to a culture that maybe not acceptable to languages off the cuff? Like you just don't want to just be the person just speaking a different language in a predominantly English speaking place and you kind of feel awkward. How can you make yourself a little bit more accessible as a multilingual language person?
Well, first of all, I say kudos to anyone who speaks more than one language, because we know there are studies that have been done that by learning, the acquisition of a second or third language makes you a little bit smarter because you're more versatile in terms of knowledge of culture and traditions and customs. So it just broadens your intellectual capacity and base. So I would not hide whatever language assets that you have. I would certainly, even if no one else speaks it, I mean, I can tell you for sure, prior to 2010, coming from Haiti, many people did not know where Haiti was before the earthquake. If you were from the Caribbean, maybe you knew for sure because it's one of the larger islands. But when I would say I speak Haitian Creole, many folks had no clue where that came from or the derivative that it's tied in with French or anything like that. So I had to explain to them. Now, when I say Haitian Creole, everyone says "sac passe." It's very commonplace. So, so it's getting more popular. And as we get into a less separated world and more inclusive global unit that we move in every day. When we talk about business, we talk about finance, education, healthcare, technology, science. Everything is intermingled. Everything is global. Everything is touching everything else. So it's not unusual for folks to come up with a different language that they're introducing in a community. And I think the response is, oh, where's that from? It's curiosity more than negativity, as it may have been in the past. And what I encourage you to do as a student, as a professional, trying to market your employability skills by having the asset of a second or third language, is to by all means put that down and be sure if they don't comment on that during your interview, be sure to bring it up. Say, hey, do you do business? Hopefully you've researched your company so you know who they do business with if they're global or international, but, kind of find a way to introduce that. Because the reason I say that is because when you have a second or third language, you should be paid more. You should be compensated for that asset. Because if that company is negotiating or has meetings with folks who speak your language and say they don't have anyone else, they might use you as an interpreter, even though you should get your certification, and I'll discuss that later. But you become an asset to that company to even be able to welcome someone to their facility, to be able to set up a phone call, or to be able to draft a letter or a proposal. So don't hide that fact. That is an asset, just like computer skills, just like anything else. Be proud of it, showcase it, and make sure that they are aware of that.
I love it. So go ahead. Any of our guests who are here sharing this information, talking, what is your experience out there? Are you being received well when you speak multiple languages? We just want to hear from you first, as far as your experience, and then you could type it in the chat, or if you want to come off and speak it out loud on voice, you may. Or do you have any questions thus far? Because we're going to go deeper into some more topics, related topics. Gabriel, Christian, anybody?
And I'll just share with you a little story real quick in terms of my introduction into my field as an interpreter and translator, which is what I've done as a profession for the last 30 years, believe it or not. Initially, I attended Rutgers University, which is in New Jersey. That's where I graduated from. I obtained a degree in political science as well as in French. And I had the idea that, hey, I would love to be a UN interpreter, being that I was in New Jersey and New York is just across the bridge, you know, take the train in. And one day, after I'd finished school, I didn't have any, at the time, this is the early 90s, I didn't have any mentor direction as far as where I want to go, if I want to get into the field of interpretation or translation. I had no guidance at all. Basically, if you learned a language, if you majored in a language, the pathway was generally speaking going to be teaching. That was basically what you were expected or kind of coached into doing. And I knew I didn't want to teach. As much as I love French, I just, that wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I took the train in one day, went into New York, got to the UN building, that wonderful big imposing building with all the wonderful multilingual, multinational flags out front. And I got the nerve, I got to the door, and I was so happy and energetic and ready to go. And I said, hey, I got my resume in hand, I got my suit on, and I said, I knocked at the door, and the person who was at the door was this guard. And he wasn't the HR person. He wasn't anyone who was hiring anybody. And he said, well, what are you here for? And I said, well, I'm here to apply at the Human Resource Department. And he said, for what? And I said, as an interpreter. And just that quickly, he said, do you have a master's degree from a translation school? And I didn't have one. I didn't know of a school. I didn't know of a program. I was dead in the water, basically. This person was really discouraging because he basically shut me down, and I just had no recourse. And I was just like, okay, fine. And I went home. I was upset. I was kind of dejected and kind of lost. And I said, okay, so I put it to rest. I said, well, I don't know, right now may not be the time. Fast forward a year later, I get a call from my former advisor at the university where I had attended at Rutgers University, who had received a request for student interpreters who were willing to volunteer for some clients they had that were coming in from Haiti via Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, who had been detained there. And this is during the Haitian refugee crisis back in the early 90s. So they put out the call, and I happened to be the only one that showed up that day to volunteer that was available, and I went ahead and volunteered. So I went in at 8 o'clock. I was to meet these clients at a hospital. They were having medical checkups, and they were pregnant. So I walked into a medical healthcare setting to interpret. And I was not an interpreter. I was simply bilingual. And I will say to you that I had a baptism by fire that day for walking in, and what I had to contend with in terms of vocabulary, medical terminology. I'd never been pregnant. I didn't know about pregnancy. So it was a lot of gesturing and a lot of what I could explain as best as I could explain. So I did my job. I volunteered. I went to the office of the place that had requested my services as a volunteer, and I was offered a position that day, that quick. And they said, we need you. We don't have anyone else to talk to our clients. You're the only one. And I said, well, I have a job. I'm really only here to volunteer. They said, no, we need you. And make a long story short, I took that job. I ended up being there for a couple of years. And that was my introduction into the field. And they trained me, and I learned a lot. I ended up doing legal interpretation, working with the courts, doing social services, like with Medicaid and TANF, children's services, did healthcare, of course. And so it really broadened my horizon in terms of the different industries that use interpreters and translators to facilitate services. So that's how I fell into it. And I've been doing it ever since. And I've had the fortunate career to be able to work in hospitals and schools, in the school district and such. And I really enjoy it because no 2 days are the same.
Okay, that is amazing. Can you guys hear me? I want to make sure everybody's hearing me.
Yes.
Okay, good. So, where do you get started? Okay, you went through your track.
Yes, I went through my track.
International.
Yeah, it's a lot better now. You are very fortunate to go into school now because you have access to a plethora of programs, not only at the university, but seminars you can take. I do some training as well. There are companies that do, translation interpretation companies that also, aside from the services that are rendered directly to clients, we also do training. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of pathways. It depends what you want to study. So the thing I say is, first of all, you got to pick your language pairs, okay? And you have to have what we call a language assessment to really understand how proficient you are and what level of proficiency you are in those two languages. So remember what I said, you have to speak as well as I'm speaking English in that other language. Okay, so excuse me. That's the benefit right now of being in this time right now. You can go online. There are a lot of YouTube videos. You can brush up on your languages. You can research, you can Google and find out who's got trainings at the universities. Many, like I live in Georgia and Atlanta. We have 3 or 4 universities that have their own degree programs or certificate programs. And certificate programs and degrees, they're different. It depends what you want to do and depends who you want to work with. So to give you an idea, it is conceivable that if you're 18 years old, you have at least a high school diploma, you are fluent or proficient in, let's say, English and Spanish or English and Portuguese. If you take at least 40-hour medical interpreter training program, which is very intense. It's 40 hours where you have to learn medical terminology, you do role plays, you learn about the healthcare system, you learn about code of ethics within our industry, the do's and don'ts, etc. It is conceivable you could get your certification within 6 months. And what that looks like is you would have to do that 40-hour training. You would have to then apply to sit for the national exam to become, let's say, a healthcare interpreter. So I'll stick with medical interpreting or healthcare interpreter because each industry has their own. So if you want to be a court interpreter or working in the legal system, it's a different type of exam and preparation which you must undertake. If you want to do American Sign Language, you must have at least a college degree, at least a bachelor's degree. And the American Sign Language is a lot more intense in terms of their training. They really have set the standard for foreign language experts to come in, translators and interpreters, because the American Sign Language was already recognized back in the 60s under the American Disabilities Act. They were the first ones to get recognition and to become something that is mandated within the healthcare or other industries where they're available and accessible to the deaf and hard of hearing clients and persons. So we in the foreign language and interpretation translation in particular have piggybacked off of their standards and their credentialing process, if you will. So like I was saying, if you want to go into the medical or healthcare interpreting, working in a hospital or a clinic or a doctor's office, you would need to have at least that 40-hour training. You would have to have a language assessment to rate what your language proficiency is, and it has to be high enough that they rate that you are really truly bilingual. And then you sit for your national exam, and then once you take the exam, you'll know immediately as you complete it whether you've passed or not. So it's not like you have to wait too long. And once you have that, then you can begin marketing yourself as a certified interpreter, medical interpreter, or there are 2 different exams that you can take, and I'm using the terms interchangeably. There's one which is the certified medical interpreter, and there's one that's the core CHI certified healthcare interpreter. They're basically equal. It just depends on what language you speak would determine which exam you sit for. because they don't offer each credentialing body has a set of language that they offer their examination in. So that's what that is.
When we're talking about specific industries that can be utilizing multi-languages, people who speak more than one language, you're talking just as an example of healthcare. Mm-hmm. You can be working for hospitals, clinics, rural communities that have language barriers, abroad for organizations.
Oh, yeah, interpreters are everywhere. We're in the healthcare, financial markets, business, international trade, the sports, the Olympics. The Olympics is done in multiple languages if you ever pay attention. You have it in English and you have it in French, and then the host country. Mm-hmm. You have, the United Nations. You have always those interpreters who are, they have the earpieces they're listening to, during the speeches and in presentations. In education, we have American Sign Language in the schools available for our students. We also have interpreters, because I've worked in the school districts. We have language interpreters in the school districts as well. So, for example, we have for parent-teacher conferences, or for students who are special ed and they're getting tested, or they're having reviews and they need to make sure that their parents are aware of their rights with a child with special needs or special education. So they want to make sure there's clear communication. Anywhere you want to facilitate clear communication, interpreters and translators are very much essential and available. Now, you don't have to be a translator or an interpreter, okay? There are other language careers, such as like a subtitler, so you're watching a movie, who's doing all the subtitles, right? For the film. You have folks who are writing the dialogue, right? And if you see, in The Godfather, for example, they're speaking a little bit of Italian. Someone had to write that dialogue in Italian to make sure it was accurate, and then make sure that when the actors were saying their lines, that it was accurately pronounced, with the right accents, etc. So they work with a language coach, I'm sure, if they weren't fluent in Italian, for example. Language career.
Yeah. So this kind of makes it broader in the sense, because you just mentioned entertainment, finance, aviation, interpreting, different things over the loudspeaker.
If you look at the signs in the airports, if you travel internationally, or even in some areas, the signage, that's the work of a translator who's putting it in multiple languages. Okay.
Even translating books and
books, articles, websites. Right now, you go to a website, it's in any language you want, just about. You just select which language you'd like,
So those are all viable careers that you can have. It's so broad. How does one get started? From just listening to you first, it sounds like you need to have some type of language translation credential, something that where you can say, I am fluent in this, not just because I speak it. I know the proper verbiage and vernacular to actually translate it in its way. How would you describe the first steps?
And well, let me share with you. And while we're on the definition, I just want to make some clear points. We are using the word translation and interpretation as an industry, and some folks use it interchangeably. But to be clear, interpretation is oral communication. Translation is written text. So you translate a document, let's say from English to Spanish, vice versa, or I will speak in English and then relay it in French and back and forth. So that would be interpretation. But we use it interchangeably, and I always have to be like with a nuance, do you need an interpreter or do you need a translator when someone requests my services, okay? So as far as how do you get into it, what I would recommend is first to make sure you have strong enough second language. So the language assessment is your first step. There are places that you can, the oral proficiency interview is an exam, for example. I talk about that in my book, that you take that, it will rate you, it will let you know what level you're at. Then you have to decide well, what field do I want to specialize in? You know, do I like science? Do I like, healthcare? Do I like legal? Do I like education? Where do I want to be? What environment do I want to be? Then you have to decide, do you want to be an interpreter or do you want to be a translator, for example? Because there are different sets of criterias and training, as well as personality traits. If you're an outgoing person, you're probably more inclined to prefer interpreting because you're with people, whether it's in person, virtual, or over the phone, but you're connecting with the person directly. If you're more of an independent, quiet person, give me my books and my computer and let me do my work, translation might be more your type of work, where you really are alone, or you might work with a team where you go back and forth just to make sure for accuracy and completion of the project. But you're generally with your books, your thesaurus, your dictionaries, and you do your work alone until it's done. So you have to consider your personality as well and what you like.
And so that's very interesting. Most of you guys are college students and, are post-grads. So what are your majors, or what did you major in college? Because that would actually help you to define what career pathway you're going to go into where you can utilize your language skills.
Absolutely. Because, for example, if you studied medical stuff, I would not advise you to start learning legal stuff. I'd say stick with the medical terminology you already have. If you studied business and that's your forte and that's what you know, or engineering, there are many opportunities. I was reading an article recently where they were hiring an engineer, and they said not only is he an engineer, but he's an engineer that speaks Russian. And they were so excited because they have other projects they want to do, and this person's going to really be able to help them promote that because of their language skills. So this is what I'm saying. This person is working as an engineer, but because of their language skills, they're able to bridge a gap and open up doors for that company so they become an asset. So your language skills are definitely welcomed if you're able to make note and make folks aware that you not only have it, but you're willing to use it to benefit them as well.
So let's go to our special superstar guest, which is our young people who are here with us. Do you guys have any pertinent questions for Ms. Roach, and to expand upon what you're experiencing out there, looking for opportunities? How, ask your questions, comments, thoughts. You can type it in the chat, or you can come off, mute. Go ahead, Gabriel.
Hello. Ms. Lynn. The question that I have, I work in education. It's really, sorry for the background noise, but it's a little weird because I'm majoring in business, but I work in education, and the work that I do in education, how can I move forward with the skills you described?
So what do you do in education? Are you a teacher, or what do you do?
I work in student services.
Student services. Do you work at a high school or a college?
Community college.
Community college. Okay. And what location are you in? Like what city or state are you in?
LA County, California, LA County.
Okay. Well, very cosmopolitan, a lot of international folks everywhere. I know that. It's like New York, right? So a city like LA would certainly, I would imagine, need your services in that community. What you need to do is, what I would suggest, first of all, before you go get your training, is see what opportunities lie within that company. So, for example, you do student services. When you do intakes and someone speaks Spanish, do they give you all the Spanish referrals, for example?
Yes, because I had a situation. Yeah, I had a predominantly in the community college that I work in, it's Spanish speaking. Their second language is Spanish speaking, and then it follows through, respectfully. But one thing, I had a situation in where I had to translate, not because it was my job, it's because of my will, because
you had to interpret, like oral communication.
Yes, through Zoom. It was through Zoom. Because it was during that pandemic, so we all went remote. Now we're a little hybrid, as you can call it. But during the pandemic 2020, the peak of it, we went virtual. So there was a situation where I had to communicated a message through one of my supervisors, and there was a student with an older student, an adult student that spoke Spanish, but their English was they lacked in their English. So therefore, I didn't have no degrees, I didn't have no certifications of.
You're what we call an ad hoc interpreter. In other words, you were on the scene and you were pulled into the situation.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Continue. So how did you feel, first of all, doing that? Did you feel confident, or did you feel reserved, or how did you feel?
I feel like I was in the spot in a way that I couldn't fail my Spanish speaking person, because they will know if I say things right, because I have to say it you have to hear the person in English, and then I have to translate it to the other student in Spanish, and it was vice versa.
And were you speaking in first person or third person?
All I know,
he said, she said, he said, she said.
I was more into the more, as you can call it, like more like make them feel at home, like I wasn't like pretty much rigid, like, oh, he said, she said, pretty much the lady, I said the lady, such and such.
Well, let me share with you, Gabriel. One of the things is, when you go through training, and I learned it as well, when you're doing it ad hoc and you haven't had the preparation, we tend to make a lot of mistakes. We're making mistakes we don't even know. Okay. Like, I don't want to criticize you, because thank goodness you were there to at least help resolve some situation. But had you had the correct training, as far as doing your interpretation, you would have felt very comfortable, and it would have just, flowed. For them to pull you into that situation, it's awkward. And I understand you want to, A, be helpful, B, you want to resolve the situation, and C, someone has requested at work for, presumably your supervisor, that you do a task. So it's very difficult to turn that down, unless you're going to say, hey, you know what, I'm just not qualified. And then they accept that answer. But I understand your earnest try to help. But what I really sincerely ask you to do is, if you're interested, is to get your certification. Because when you go the pathway of certification as an interpreter, you will learn skill sets of what to do and what not to do, and how to handle different situations, whether you're in person, whether you're over the phone, or whether you're in a video chat. For example, we know that, for example, if you're talking over the telephone in a conference call, it's not necessarily the clearest conversation. And then, for example, if you have someone who's of limited English speaking, and maybe they're an older person. I've had folks in a hospital, and they were so weak, I couldn't hear what they were saying. You know what I'm saying? So it's very difficult for me to interpret something I can't hear. And so ideally, in person, if not video chat, last resort, telephone. But what's your question as far as how you can, do you have a question about, where to get training? You just want to transition into being an interpreter full time at the school? Or do you want to just get compensated? Because what happens is, I've worked, for example, as a social worker before in a hospital, bilingual social worker, but they didn't pay me. They paid me for being bilingual, but they didn't pay me for my services as an interpreter. And that's a whole different skill set. So there becomes a question where I say to, folks that are working in a hospital in particular, like these nurses or front desk folks, I say, you know what, they ought to be compensating you for that. And if you went to your training and you could say, hey, I have the certificate, they have to. They know this because they have a language department. Does your school not have a language service department?
Yes, we have we actually, well, I don't want to speak too much because I have to look into that, but we do tailor services to our Spanish speaking population.
But do you have something called like a language service department where they have available interpreters or translators for work, or no?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
That's what the inquiry would be, is if they have that available, and how could you get tied into that? And will they pay for your training? That's the question I would ask HR at your school. Do you have a language department where they offer, where you have interpreters and translators on staff? And how can I participate in that? And do you offer training? Will you pay for my training? Because when I worked for the school district, they paid a lot of my training and testing because they wanted us to be, you know, competent and do a good job.
That's you pretty much took the question out of my mouth, because that's what I wanted to speak about. How can I, you know, as a maybe not a full time, you know, more like a side gig, you know, like
and you know what? If you work in the school district, interpreting and translation is a great, you know, source of part-time gigs, because you can work as a freelance interpreter or translator where you only do assignments when you feel like. So they can call you up today. If you're available, you go. It's kind of like substitute teaching, you know, you go in, they call you. If you want to go, you go. If you don't, no harm, no foul. You know, so that could be a good way for you to introduce yourself into the field.
I will also suggest in pursuing anything that's related to your language, whether you're just trying to get your feet wet and just try to try it out to see how well you're going to get acclimated into that interpreting / translation career pathway, that you make yourself available on your business card. Say, hey, able to speak and translate or interpret, however it's defined, that what you're
list your service and your availability.
Yes, list your services and availability, and you can speak on in the industries that you're in. Like you could say it like I'm familiar with medical terminology. I'm familiar with, you know, education services to translate between, you know, communicating. I'm just going to use that word, communicating, to be safe, communicating between student and the information that's being, you know, disseminated to the students. So you want to kind of put that out there so that people can identify you as that. Not just I speak Spanish, French, or I'm multilingual. I have services that I can provide to you. That makes you more valuable than actually just a regular Joe or Jane who speaks another language.
Yeah, you have to qualify in what capacity you can be an asset. As you said, you have you're an educator, you're in the student services, you're on the front line as in terms of communication with the incoming students and, you know, continuing students. So you understand what they're up against in terms of, you know, registration or what they're trying to do. So that would make you, because you have already that expertise in your industry, now you have the language combined, go get that certification and you will be like a premium employee, because they know that they can count on you and you know exactly what you're doing, you know. Absolutely.
And another thing you should
thank
consider,
you.
You're welcome, Gabriel. Another thing you guys can consider in your whole career pathway is like, look at your company and see what is accessible at the fingertips in the languages that you're familiar with. If they don't have it accessible and they're reaching to a certain demographic that speaks that language, why don't they have it accessible? How can you make yourself present an opportunity saying, hey, I know that you're trying to build more relationship with the Spanish speaking community, but your information that you're sharing it's not relatable. Can I help? Can I assist in how to communicate that? Can I help to translate the documents? Can I help to interpret, you know, the messages that you're putting out there on Facebook and LinkedIn and whatever you're doing, so that they can have more relatable information that relates to the community that they're trying to serve. So that's another way you can offer your services, so that you're looking at this as a whole aspect. And they're like, man, he's more valuable than we thought. He's looking at other ways, because a student can come in, for example, we're just going to use you as an example, Gabriel. A student may come in and say, I'm having problem understanding what my teacher means in communicating, you know, this, you know, project, or how can I, you know, be more, you know, like, okay, well, let me show you how. I see that these documents are not the way they need to be. Let's interpret it. You know, let me help you interpret it in a better way so you can communicate it easier. So think about creative ways that you can add your assets to it, so that you're not just a one-off, like, okay, I just brought them in just to interpret to this one. It doesn't cross over well, because languages have a different way how they translate from English to Spanish and Spanish to English. You know, you got to find those words that meet the middle, and those ways to communicate them in a professional manner.
And also the culture. The culture is very intertwined into the language. You can't discuss language without culture and traditions and customs, and understanding that there are a plethora of countries that speak Spanish, but the cultures vary. So the Spanish that you might encounter with someone from Puerto Rico or from Chile, from Venezuela, from Colombia, from, Mexico, it can vary because they have different cultural backgrounds, different, governments, different everything, geopolitical situations going on. So it's important that the localization be there as well, what we call in translation interpretation localization. In other words, using what will be familiar language to that individual from their region. You understand? Because sometimes when I worked and I would have a group of colleagues who were Spanish interpreters, they could spend hours arguing over 2 words that go out in a letter. Because, and you're laughing because you know why, because in Mexico you can say it, but in Cuba you can't. It's the same word, but it means 2 different things to 2 different nations.
So you should make sure you have, your culture,
culture is
cultural demographic that you're targeting when you are sending or translating or interpreting information, so that it can be relatable to the demographic, so that you can say, okay, as a, Latin American, what part of Latin America are we talking about? Who's my communication? Is it the same here and the same there? And I'm telling you, that will also change how you go about your career, and it will open up the doors to be more relatable, like you mentioned, Gabriel, in the first place. Like, you want to make it more feel like home. This feels more like home. And then a person feels like, I'm always going to come to you. And now you're invaluable. Nobody is going to fire you. You're only going to go up.
Because they're all looking for Gabriel, correct.
They're just like, they're all looking for him because he relates to them in a more communicative, home feeling, that's my big brother type of way, as opposed to, okay, this is what it is, and bye, see you later.
and also another thing I'll share with our audience is that a way to get yourself into the industry is by volunteering. Volunteer and see if this is for you. Volunteer at major organizations like your refugee, any refugee center, Red Cross, those major organizations. Nonprofits, NGOs
homeless shelters is a good place.
Homeless shelters, any place that they do intake. And you can call around, United Way, those places. They can give you a list of opportunities that you may want to be able to just let your services be known and see if you can get a feel for it. Because one thing about interpretation, a lot of it has to do with the environment in which you work also. So working in a hospital is different than working in the courts. It's different from working in a school. It's different from working in the community. The clientele you see, the subject matter that you have to address. For example, if you're working in the courts, you might have child abuse cases that you have to take up. You might have violence. You might have criminal activity. So you have to see, what are you comfortable with? That's another thing. What is your comfort level? Like I said, when I first was introduced to it, I was working with women that were pregnant, and I didn't know anything about pregnancy. I had to learn real quick about their needs and what was going on with them, and brush up on my medical terminology for sure, So that's what I advise you to do. Volunteering, get your training, get your language assessment, find out and when I say proficiency, I'm talking about reading, writing, and speaking. That's what makes you proficient in a language. Okay? It's not a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You have to know all of the words. Okay? That's what's very important, because imagine you're in the middle of an interpretation and you don't know the next sentence, you can't interpret it. I mean, that's a problem. That's a breakdown in communication, and you're supposed to be the expert in the room.
Great. So hopefully that answered your question very thoroughly. Thumbs up if you like it. And then Christian, anybody else have a question they want to add to it? Oh, we have some more.
I see Raven also is here.
Yay, Raven. Raven, you want to add to this because you're a recruiter, and how does people with multiple languages serve your organization better when you're talking to abroad? If she can hear me. Thank you.
Hey, yes, I can hear. Hey, Lynn.
Hi, Raven. Thank you for being
here. Yeah, so I do recruiting for International Paper. Excuse the background noise. That's just my dog playing with his toy. But I do recruiting for International Paper, and so a lot of our candidates are. I'm sorry. Stop. So a lot of our candidates that we hire, it's not a requirement. However, it is very good for them to have that skill of being bilingual because we are International Paper. And so we have businesses and locations that are international. And so we are in, let's see, Europe, we're in Asia, we're in a whole bunch of other different countries. So if you are multicultural or speak multiple languages, it is very good. It looks great on the resume, especially when we're trying to hire for those positions. How do you communicate with the customer that is in a totally different country than you, right? But we're trying to do business in America because we're headquartered in America, right? So I think it's a great skill to have for all of the students that are on the call. And I agree with everything that has been said thus far.
Thank you, Ms. Pratt. Mm-hmm. Lynn, do you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, when you talk about opportunities in a global market, if I can just go back to something real quick. We have been in a pandemic since 2019, right? COVID-19, it's now 2022. If you think back when, let's say November, December, January 2020, when they first started getting an inkling that the coronavirus was heading towards the United States and we weren't really sure what it was. Well, guess what? We had to find out in a jiffy, what is this coronavirus? Well, this originated in Wuhan, China. So this was information that was, in Mandarin Chinese that had to be converted into all languages around the world for scientists and medical people to be able to do research and develop vaccines. They had to have that information. They had to have that information from the labs, from the reports on the ground at, patient zero who was in Wuhan, China. And how fast was that developed? Because of the work of translators and interpreters were able to get that information. No one had time to go learn Mandarin Chinese to interpret what those reports were saying. So we were on the front line with that.
So with something like that, how would somebody register to become an interpreter for, an
agency, a worldwide agency? Yeah, the thing with that is you have to be certified because at that level, you're dealing with such critical information. They only are going to take someone who has had rigorous training and knows exactly what they're doing. They're not going to take an ad hoc person at this level. They need a professional. But how do you get in? Like I said, there are a lot of NGOs, there are a lot of, international relief organizations that have departments because they're international and they travel, that I'm sure they're always in need of interpreters who are willing to travel with them. I know, for example, when they have catastrophes around the world, but in particular when they had the Haitian earthquake, I was tapped as a translator to do translation of texts, and I was doing that as pro bono work in the community,
So there's multiple ways that people can get involved. So any more questions real quick that we can ask, because we want to make sure you guys get all this.
And what I will say, I have, if I may share with you, I have all these questions that are being asked. I have put together a lot of these answers in a book that I've written. And my book is called A Multi-Billion-Dollar Industry, Translation and Interpretation, The Future of Language Careers. And I've written this book to address many of the questions that I had when I was coming into the field, and no one seemed to be able to guide me. And so I have it as kind of like an introduction into the industry. So what's covered in the book? I talk about, taking your language skills seriously, about getting certification. I talk about who's using the services, the US government spends a ton of money on translation and interpreter services. The Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, Department of Defense, all of them need interpreters. The military, they deploy people all around the world. They need people in the foreign intelligence to be able to decipher, chatter, what they call chatter, which is, other entities that may not mean us well. And they're speaking their native tongues, and sometimes it's like Arabic or something else, whatever language it is. It's not always Arabic. It could be French, it could be Haitian Creole, it could be anything. And so they need to have a pulse on what's going on in the global community. So you would be an asset in the military. Let me share with you, in the military, there is paid differential for speaking second or third languages. So if, for example, I happen to know my language pairs, French and Haitian Creole, are in demand for the military. If I were a young person, which I'm not, but let's say I was 25 and wanted to enlist, and I had those language skills, I could, at my level of fluency and proficiency, I know I would test where they would be able to pay me a pay differential of earning up to $1,000 a month extra just for speaking my language. And this is something that the military offers. And I also do testing for folks who want to they want to increase their ability to travel or to get deployment in different areas. So they have to test their levels every so often, maybe every 6 months or annually, and to see if they upgrade their level. And based on that, they will get a pay increase.
That's great. So how can they find out more about your book? Let's get that out there.
Okay. So with my book, I'm going to, not only with my book, but I'm going to also share my screen, if I may, on how you can stay in touch with me. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Let's share. Let's see.
Take your time.
Are you able to see this?
Not yet. You have to share it again.
Oh, okay.
And while she's sharing the screen, was this helpful for you guys? You can type in the chat. We have some other things we're going to share with you before we leave. Thank you. Excellent.
Okay. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. So here I have listed what I talk about: learning about language careers, the advantages of using your second language proficiency in the workplace. It helps you in terms of being hired, because if all things considered and you have a language skill, that will make you a better candidate 9 times out of 10 for any HR official. And as well as in the military, they see that as an asset. You have an invitation. If you want to take a snapshot, you're welcome to join me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. And then I have my website here where I do trainings. I do have, like, if you wanted like a free consultation just to get an idea about you pursuing a career, feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to talk to someone. I have my book out, which is, I've mentioned before. And for anyone who's on the call today, if you would like to get an autographed paperback copy, I have 20 that are available from my book signing I recently did. If you're interested, you can send me an email with the subject line NCRF book. And I also have the alternative where if you would like an e-book, the PDF copy, I can email it to you and you will have a discount as well. And so I'm offering this for our participants and our viewers who have been engaged in our conversation and have allowed me to be able to share some of my expertise and information with you. This discounted offer is for a few days. So take a snapshot, get in touch with me. I'd be happy to continue to communicate with anyone who's interested in learning more about how to parlay their language skills into a profession or a part-time gig.
Can you also put in our chat your email so they can actually know where to go?
Yes. Okay,
chat?
yes.
That would be great.
I'll do
And
that.
While she's doing that, you guys take that snapshot, and then we are going.
Oh, was it still there? No, I switched it.
Yeah, you did, just for a second, but it's okay. Put your information in the chat so they can contact you and say they would like a copy of your book, and then you can relay them to the proper area to get it. And while she's doing that, any further questions before we comments? Questions? Okay.
Just to share with you one last thing I didn't mention about salary. So as I mentioned before, as an interpreter, even just with a high school diploma, you're starting off with your certification now. You're starting off at probably $20, $25 an hour part-time. This is before you graduate college. Okay, beats flipping burgers. Also, if you get your degree, and of course they pay more for depending on the language you speak, depending on your experience, depending on your level of education, depending on the region in which you live, and depending on their needs and depending on the employer. But interpreters are making good money, and there's a tremendous, tremendous need. The projected job growth is like 25%, which is really, really extremely high, because the average industry has probably steady growth of 5% annually. So at 25%, they can't even fill the jobs that are, that need to be filled. And every day it's changing and it's growing because of our international community is constantly, moving around, and, folks you wouldn't expect to be in Oklahoma speaking different languages are, they're everywhere.
So she'll definitely check out your local organizations that you work for, your community, to see within your own community, your city halls and stuff, see what they need, get your certifications, and then email Miss Lynn. She put her email in the chat for the consult, free consult, and the book. And then she could talk about her services outside of that, because yes, she is an interpreter. So yes, she offered her services for free for us for this time being. But if you want to extend your relationship with her to give her some private coaching, she can work out whatever that is that, compensation.
I'm happy to, connect with anyone. Like I said before, I'm happy to guide you as much as I can. I really enjoy talking to folks who are interested. I'm very passionate about what I do. I love talking to folks who want to get into it. I love talking to folks who want to start their own business. Maybe you've been doing it and you want to start your own company, and you don't know, the ins and outs of how you would manage your system and how you would hire folks, how do you get your contracts, things like that. So I do a lot of different types of consulting at different levels. So just, feel free to drop me a line. I won't bite. I'll be happy to assist you in any way I can. And again, I know we're wrapping up, but I just really sincerely want to thank Ms. Parker, the National College Resource Foundation, Dr. Price, and all of you for taking the time out to join me to hear what I had to say. And I just encourage everyone to continue studying your language, perfecting it, read. A couple of freebies: Duolingo, D-U-O, Lingo, as well as B-Lingua, B-E-E, Lingua, L-I-N-G-A, are two apps I recommend to continue to practice your language skills, to keep you, the B-Lingua is reading. So you read it, you can have it in English, the text, and you can have it in Spanish at the bottom. So it helps you with reading comprehension and fluency. And then the other one, which is Duolingo, is an interactive app, and they both have free versions. And if you want to pay for an upgrade, you can do so as well. But those are two ways that you can stay connected to your language skills and continue to improve.
And they will teach you the proper, verbiage of how to communicate that language. Maybe some of them have the slang versions, but for the most part, you want to learn the simple,
the proper
way,
standard.
so professional. Okay, so go ahead and put those two.
Yes, I'll put that in there for you. Apps that practice apps.
Yes. Okay. And then I'm going to share my screen real quick and we're going to just close this out. You can find Lynn at Lynn, LYNN at 4U, just the U, not YOU, just you, languageservices.com, and just copy that